Rhode Island could potentially have another constitutional convention. The last time it convened to look at its constitution was in 1986, so this is not unprecedented, but doesn't happen too often. And why the state would want to do this is so that it can really look at overhauling its structure in a much more, I guess, quick fashion rather than slicing at it by ballot measure by ballot measure. And so the people who are pushing to have a constitutional convention want to look at things like shortening term limits, making the legislature smaller, things that basically make the government smaller. And so the voters will decide on November 4th whether or not they want to address any of those issues at a convention.
In the case of Florida, again, that would be the very first state in the South to pass medical marijuana. And what makes it interesting is, well, first of all, it would be the first in the South. It would also be the third largest market, narrowly smaller than New York, for medical marijuana. And also, that law, unlike some others, gives a lot of latitude for doctors to prescribe it for anything that they think, a condition where the benefits of medical marijuana outweigh the risks. Now, in most states, it's written, their medical marijuana laws are written in a way that only allow for certain debilitating illnesses like ALS and certain cancers, various other things. This is broader. A doctor would have a lot of latitude, and that's not completely unprecedented. California and Massachusetts also give greater latitude to doctors. But another thing that sets it apart is the fact that it would be a constitutional amendment. Most states have just a statute. So it would be a constitutionally protected right, and there's a lot broader latitude to doctors. It's quite heated. The supporters need 60% of the voters to pass a constitutional amendment, which makes their effort a bit harder. But polling has kind of been a little bit all over the map, but it's generally been above the 60% threshold.
This one's a really good one, and I have brought this up not at a party or a bar, but with family members, and they're interested enough. So Arizona has it's called Prop 122. It's the state sovereignty measure. It would essentially allow the state to opt out of implementing federal laws or policy. And a lot of this kind of stems from environmental issues the state has had in the past, and disputes with the EPA or whatever federal governing law. We wrote about it, it's on our website. There's a particular case in Tombstone, Arizona, that really just is a good example of how the state and feds can clash, in that Arizona wants to make upgrades to this pipeline, but a lot of it runs through federal land, and there are restrictions in the federal land on what kind of things what kind of machinery and tools and things that you can actually bring onto federal land.
They really run the gamut. I wrote a story about 5 different ballot measures that all deal with election reform, but in pretty different ways. One deals with petition gathering and how hard it is to get a signature on the ballot. And that's in Missouri. There's another one that deals with early voting and actually would cut back on early voting. There's another one that would end same-day registration. You have to look at the longer-term picture here. So after the 2010 elections, there were a lot of states, particularly with Republican legislatures, that passed things like voter ID laws, that asked for things like proof of citizenship to vote, and did away with early voting or reduced early voting, or did away with same-day registration during early voting periods or on the day of the election. This year there's been a little bit of a changing of the tides, turning of the tides, in part because those laws have already passed. So whatever kind of legislative activity is going to happen this year, there's less stuff to do if you believe that voter fraud is a problem and you want to try to prevent it. Some of the other ballot measures deal with gun rights. There are actually 2 competing bills in Washington state that would make it possible to, or that would require universal background checks. in the state, and there'd be one that would essentially prevent a universal background check law from happening in the state. Earlier in the year, in August, there was a primary that also dealt with gun control, but actually it was more of a gun rights provision, and Missouri voters enacted a constitutional amendment that strengthens and expands the state constitutional protections for the right not only to bear arms, but also to bear ammunition and gun accessories. The ballot measure passed overwhelmingly statewide, but if you look at urban areas which have the highest incidence of gun homicides, actually it did not pass. Most voters in those areas actually voted against the measure. And it was illustrative of what I think is happening a lot in terms of gun policy debates right now in the United States, where urban areas where there are a lot of gun homicides have a very different attitude about how we should deal with gun violence than in rural areas, and maybe in suburbs or somewhere in between. You have this sort of this contrast where Washington State may pass really strong laws, a really strong law that makes it harder for certain people to get guns, and then you have Missouri, which is actually trying to affirm and expand access to guns and other things that are related to guns but aren't guns themselves.
Georgia has got an amendment that would cap its state income tax at 6%. And this is mostly based on the fact that most of Georgia's neighbors have a lower income tax or no income tax, like Florida. The state actually is about in the middle as far as all 50 states on the level of income tax, but this is, kind of we saw more income tax related measures last year, and it seems like Georgia is just kind of hopping onto that theme. It's mostly to stay competitive, and of course the downside is that you're really limiting yourself as a state. I mean, that the income tax is most states' bread and butter, and so if you limit that, then and you don't know what's going to happen in the future, especially with a constitutional amendment like this, it can be dicey.